It's been a while, huh? We're back. Yeah. So for anyone that's worrying about my voice, the husky thing is not put on. It's just I'm getting better from picking up something pretty rough out while we were filming in Cannes. So we'll talk about that in a second because there's some other stuff with that. But for those of you that are joining live, welcome. Again, we've been offline for about a month and a half. It's been the longest gap I think we've had since lockdown began, from memory. But in the meantime, I've done, I think, twice around the world or something stupid like that. And the result of that was last week's one had to get postponed because, unfortunately, I was a little bit ill, and no one wants to listen to someone that's really sick trying to talk them through picture editing. But that's what we're going to do today. You'll have to excuse if I press the magic cough button thing. That's on me, not you, but I don't want to deafen anyone. But for the next hour, we're going to run through your pictures that you've sent through in that program, Capture One, and we're going to edit them using Capture One's raw processing software that allows us to take the picture that you took, the raw data that your camera recorded onto the sensor, hopefully enhance it a bit, get back to what we saw, get the image looking like how it felt, and then produce a nice version of it at the other end. Some of you have sent things through with some questions and some challenges. Some people have just sent me an image saying, what would you do? Whole mix of that. So we'll try and cover as many as we can today in the next hour. But before that, let's get in. And hello to everyone that's live. For those of you that aren't live, why not? Why aren't you waking up in the middle of the night? Like, who is it? Terry's waking up in the middle of the night from Australia. That's commitment. That's what we need. So let's hopefully get more of that. Yeah. Today we are going to be using Capture One version 16.4.2 asterisk. Very important asterisk. The 0.2 is actually only relevant for Mac OS users. So in this box here that you're watching me on, we're on Mac OS. There was a release that came out to fix a crashing bug, effectively. It was a very unique set of circumstances, as always bugs are. But what it meant was there was a service release that went out just for Mac. If you're a PC user, most of the bugs were already fixed in 16.4.2. Oh, sorry, 0.1. Ugh, there you go. Gets confusing already. So, a few things to talk about with this 0.4 thing. And I guess the most obvious is this one, the split. Let's call it that, because I think that's probably the most accurate way of describing it. So, for those of you that are long-time Capture One users, you'll be familiar with the fact that Capture One used to have lots and lots of different versions. There was Capture One Express, there was Capture One Pro, there was Capture One, there was Capture One for Nikon, Capture One for Sony, Capture One for Fuji, I think. And then there was cultural heritage, and then you had e-commerce extensions and so on. And over time, Capture One has slowly rationalized that down into Capture One, effectively Pro. And then you had two options. You could buy just the Pro, the desktop software, or you could bundle it into the all-in-one pack, which is the middle one up there. So all-in-one included Pro, but also mobile, and also some of the live functions and enhanced support and so on. So in 16.4, which was released, when was that? A couple of weeks ago now? Feels like it. A new product, yay, got announced, which is Studio. So Studio, by Capture One's own words, let's use their own one, you get everything we've got. So effectively, it is the Pro version of Capture One with some extra functions which are specifically tailored towards studio shooters. So we've had lots of questions over the last couple of weeks in forums, on Facebook, on email, on whatever about why isn't all-in-one now all-in-one? Because surely all-in-one means that we get Studio as well. It's a slightly different product. So if you, like me, edit your images in Capture One with all the normal editing tools, your Pro version of Capture One hasn't changed. It is literally still Capture One Pro. It's still being developed. It's still the live version. It's still the core. It's the base of everything that Capture One has built around it. The Studio release has a load of extra functions specifically engineered for tethered studio shooting. So we've got Lots and lots of options for multiple monitors with different choices of what's displayed on monitor A, monitor B, monitor C. The AI tool has got some slight enhancements to it in terms of its intelligence. The AI crop tool in terms of its intelligence, which is specific to Studio. So if you imagine you're shooting a product campaign for a fashion company and you want the crop to be genuinely automatically done all the way through, regardless of whether I shoot in landscape, portrait, with things in the background, clean, busy, doesn't matter. The version that's the AI crop tool that's in Studio has a lot more intelligence in it, which is able to do all of that stuff automatically. You've got extra tokens now in terms of being able to name files and sessions and so on. So lots and lots of stuff that makes automation and e-commerce a lot faster. It makes studio shooting more pleasant for people that have got art directors over their shoulder, or the client watching on a monitor and you want them to rate things and so on. But to you and I, most of us who are shooting out there, come back, edit, it makes no difference. Because those functions aren't really anything that you'd want, unless you wanted to beam things into another room for everyone to watch what you edit or whatever. It doesn't actually make much of a difference whether you have Studio or Pro. Of course, Capture One aren't going to stop you buying Studio. If you want it, great. And it is now the premium level of software. But if you have an all-in-one, or if you own a Pro version of the software, whether it's perpetual or you've done the monthly subscription, nothing much has changed. And actually, as a result, 16.4 was a relatively minor upgrade for you guys, because the only difference really was some Fuji support for some new cameras and the AI crop tool, which we'll touch on in a second. But it's relatively minor. So there's a lot of hype about Studio. It's caused a lot of questions, but the reality is, for you and I that are using Pro, not a lot has changed. So don't worry. Chili, do you have to rent the all-in-one and mobile versions of Studio, or can you buy the old perpetual license? To be honest, on Studio, I don't know, because I actually haven't had a look at the option on it. So I'd have a look. I mean, all-in-one, yes, it's a monthly subscription, because that's the way that all of those apps and support and everything is bundled in together. Pro, just the desktop software on its own, you can buy outright. But remember, and actually it's funny, I keep saying this, but please do remember, and that means don't forget when it doesn't suit you, that when you buy a perpetual license now with Capture One, you are buying that version. You're not buying future updates. You are not buying future versions. You're buying that version. So do not complain when you make that choice that Capture One is updated and you don't get access to those updates. If you need access to those updates, you can upgrade your perpetual license for sure. But if you always want to be on the latest, and that's the most important thing for you, for whatever reason, I'm one of those people, I always want the latest version. The easiest option is subscribe. But some people have a problem with that. I get it. But the trade-off is, if you're on perpetual, that's what you're locked in with. And other question. So Chili, does the Pro version still shoot tethered? Yes, it does. Nothing has changed to the Pro version. So all of the functions that you're used to, the tethering, every single part of Pro is still there, and it's what Studio is built on. It's just the extra tweaks that are now in the Studio version are on top. And actually, David, yes, sorry, I have forgotten to mention that. So yes, in terms of features, 16.4 in Pro was actually a relatively minor update. What has happened in the background, though, is the speed of AI subject selection and background selection. I think one of the metrics is it's 4 times faster. Another of the metrics, I think, in terms of the AI mask preparation is now 18 times faster or something like that. So it is a big boost. That does make a substantial change for people that are editing, but you're not missing anything by not having Studio if Pro is what you're used to using. Okay, let's just cover another quick question from Powell. The upgrade price from 16.3 with AI Select, 16.4 with AI Crop only was rather mind-blowing. Yeah, it will be, because the upgrades from Perpetual, you're effectively buying a new version with a little bit of a discount. But yeah, as it's my only raw processor, I did it again. So Oh man, that phrase, life's about choices, but it is. So genuinely, please do make good ones and the right ones for you. But no one is forcing anyone down a road. No one is getting rid of Pro. Pro remains. It's just for those studio people. And actually, let me just flip the argument round to what I have heard. The argument was that I've heard a few times, why aren't we getting those features in Pro? The counter argument, and I see this a lot, why do I have to pay for features I'll never use? So they can't win. So Studio is designed to take a subset of features that are specifically for commercial studio shooting, bundle them up into a premium product. So it means that your Pro license doesn't change. You imagine if they put it into everyone's, everyone ends up paying a little bit more for it. Outrage. They can't, as I say, they can't win. So back to our version. That is what we are using today, 16.4. If you're on PC, it'd be 0.1. If you're on Mac, it'd be 0.2 if you're on the latest. Most of what I'm going to be using today is going to be perfectly viable in 16.3 and actually 0.2 and probably 0.1 as well. Maybe even, well, a lot of it would still be relevant in Capture One 22, as it were, which is version 15. But for all intents and purposes today, that's what we're using. So if you don't have that, get updated, please, because it makes your life easier, trust me. If you want to send in files as well, that is where to do it, there. So paulreeferlive.wetransfer.com, that's where you send your raw files into. That's where we'll pick up all your files and your edits, and we'll get going. I said very quickly that I would go into talking about CAN. So we were out with Capture One a couple of weeks ago now, 10 days, 10 days ago. And we were shooting a wonderful guy, Alessandro, as he was capturing all of the stars on the red carpet in Cannes, which was absolute chaos. Absolute chaos. I've never seen anything like it. Trying to video and trying to capture the ambience is very easy because it's just chaos. Trying to do that well is a bit more challenging. So you'll see, if you have done on the Capture One channel, there are some teasers out there. There's going to be a cool behind the scenes thing about how Alessandro actually uses Capture One pretty much overnight to express stuff out. So you'll see that at some point. So that's getting teased at the moment, but you'll see the final one pretty soon. But that was actually what made me a bit sick. So that's why you missed last week's editing session. Sorry. Right, let's go into Capture One. There we go. Pretty picture from Roger in Capture One. This is actually a panorama, and Roger's first point, actually, in his sort of questions was the inability to get a panorama with edits to me. So the challenge that we have is this DNG thing. So if for those of you that have been here in a long time, you'll remember that when Capture One put in the panorama tool, it now produces a DNG, which is a raw file as a panorama, which is great because it means that you can make all the same edits that you could do in the original raw, but now as a stitch. So you don't have to edit first and then stitch later. You could actually stitch and then make your edits as one picture. The problem, and I think I covered this a couple of sessions ago, we don't have a fix for it at the moment, but the problem is the ability to export that DNG with its edits from Capture One is near on impossible. There are ways of doing this. One of them isn't pretty. So I've done it before. I've created a catalog, an embedded catalog, and I've put just the panorama files and then therefore the export of the DNG in that catalog. Made all the edits and had to send the whole catalog to someone for them to be able to see the edits, which is a bit ridiculous. I grant you that. I don't know if that's going to change. I don't know what the technical limitation is, but as it stands, if you send us a panorama, we only get the raw version of the DNG. We don't get it with any edits because you cannot export a DNG as an EIP, unfortunately. So when you go to export original files, for whatever reason, it doesn't carry across those files, and it doesn't carry across those edits. So the EIP effectively is dead. So what's rather useful, what Roger's done, is send me the JPEG of the panorama post edits and the combined DNG. Great. So we can edit it today, which is kind of handy. And the biggest question that was out of the output, because actually Roger's quite happy with this, and he should be. It's a nice edit, nice warm golden tones. I'm presuming this was sort of late in the day, looking at that shadow length there, or it was winter, given some of the brownness of the what is it? Grassland, hillland, mountain land, either way. But there's an issue, which is these halos down here. And while they're subtle when you zoom out, when you zoom in, they are starting to get a little bit obvious. So I'm hoping that you can all see on the screen. If you see here, we've got effectively the mountain line here. That mountain line has got darker, like a pencil line, right on the dark side of it. Then it's got really light on the other side of it, on the light side of it. So for those of you that have 5 or 6 minutes later on, go on to our channel, go on to the playlist that's called Pro Tips. It should be on the front page of the channel, and you'll find one called Clarity, Structure and Sharpening, and that will explain what's going on in here. But briefly, what's effectively happening, the way that clarity and structure work, is they look for boundaries between pixels, and they look for dark and light variations. And what they do is they go up to the boundary and they say, right, you pixel that's darker on the darker side of it, because you're darker, get darker again. And you pixel that's lighter on the lighter side of it, because you're lighter, get lighter again. So effectively, if you've got two pixels that are very close in their midtones, it effectively adds micro contrast, which is what we talk about when we're referring to a clarity tool. So it adds micro contrast to mostly edges, but also sometimes some areas as well. Now, the problem with that is when we get to boundaries like this, because, and this applies also to clarity and structure and sharpening if you overdo it. Because if I look at the original here, we don't have quite the level of haloing that we do here. And in here, I can't see, as I say, I can't see Roger's edits in there, but I'm guessing there's a clarity layer and I'm guessing there's probably a structure layer, and they're probably on masks. And what happens is the mask of the sky, let's say, ends right at this boundary. And then Capture One's got a problem, because it says, well, I'm at a boundary, the next pixel along is darker, so I need to get lighter. Great. But as a result, I'm already getting lighter. What about the pixel one behind? And what about the pixel one behind that? Because they're not next to a darker pixel. So it drops off. And what you're seeing is this instant I need to get lighter line, and then back to normal. And the same is happening on the dark side. So you're getting a I need to be darker line. And then when it steps a pixel back, or 2 pixels back, or 3 pixels back, Capture One says, well, there's no darker bit, so I'll leave you alone. That's fine. And the difference in terms of clarity, structure, and sharpening is dealing pretty much with edges, lines, very, very detailed textures. Structure is looking for, again, edges, so almost think of the leaves on a tree. And clarity is looking at the tree itself, the whole tree. So the area of the tree. So we're talking about amounts of focus that it's applying this effect to. But just to demonstrate, so effectively they're all a form of a sharpening tool in some way, shape or form. I'm going to put a radius quite big on here on the sharpening tool, just so you can see, lower down my threshold, so it's going to affect everything. Now you can see even with the base sharpening, we've now started to see some haloing. If I increase my sharpening, and we'd never do this, don't worry, but you can pretty much see what's happening here. So at that boundary line, which is what Capture One uses to effectively sharpen, because it's not actually sharpening, it's just adding micro contrast to where the boundaries are to give the effect of sharpening. So at that boundary line, this is what we've told it. I want you to sharpen 900, a lot of sharpening. And to do that, you can stray 2.3 pixels away from any edge to add in that lighter or darker toning to give me the effect of sharpening. So in other words, I can spill quite a way. That's what we refer to when it's radius. So from the line of sharpening, how far can it spill? In this case, quite a lot. And that's why you're seeing a wide halo. Threshold. So threshold is saying basically how different does the edge or boundary have to be before I do any sharpening? So if I put this threshold up high, it's going to have very little effect, because unless it was basically black and white, it's not really going to sharpen anything. You can see it's left this alone. This is a lot less. Halfway down, it started to pick up on these, but it's left some of this alone. If I put the threshold all the way down, it's even now sharpening noise. So that threshold is controlling when Capture One kicks in the sharpening. The radius tells it how far from the edge it's allowed to increase that contrast to give us the effect of sharpening. So the tighter I go, the less haloing I'll see, but the less sharpening effect I get as well. The wider I go, the more haloing I'll see, but it will appear, when zoomed out, to look a lot sharper. Zoomed in or printed, it's going to look pretty hideous. And then the amount is how much sharpening to apply. So we can apply 0. So we could have no threshold, in other words, sharpen everything, knock yourself out, go as far as you want. But as long as this sharpening amount is 0, it's not going to have any effect. And then as I start bringing it in, there it is. Now, clarity isn't actually that different to our sharpening tool. If I go into here and start whacking up clarity and whacking up structure, you can see remnants of that already starting to appear. So we can see the dark side of this has started getting darker. The light side of it has started to get that little light halo. If I change from natural, which is the most forgiving type of clarity, and let's go to something like punch, which is pretty brutal, you can see we're starting to get some false color in there. You're getting, more and more halos, basically. And it's just not very nice. If I go to the original classic clarity, you can actually see this dark patch here, where that's spread all of that contrast. So what I'm seeing in Roger's picture, if I go into the JPEG, this is either through over sharpening or over structure. Everything else pretty much in this image is fine. There is a function in Capture One called halo suppression. Now in theory, if I drive this up, yay, it's fixed the halos. But let me just do a before and after. Over sharpening doesn't make it better. It fixes the halos here if I use the halo suppression tool, but look how weird some of these areas look. They're just not right. And that's where over sharpening, regardless of what corrective tools you use, remember the halo suppression is there to correct for the fact that you've over sharpened. So regardless of that, the sharpening tool is not designed to be used to this extent and make an image better. It will actually make it worse. So what I would do, just as a way of working, number one, never ever sharpen anything less than 100%. You can do more, and just bear in mind now, any little thing that I see is probably going to be over-egged, so I don't maybe have to worry quite so much when I zoom out or print. But never sharpen at less than 100%, because you're not the preview is not able to demonstrate what's actually going on. In this case here, I would be in a place of, typically, my radius is about 0.5 or 0.6. You need it to give it some room to move. My threshold is always about 0.4. So that seems to be a good sort of, I guess, compromise in terms of how I'm happy Capture One kicking in or not. I generally don't need halo suppression. If we do, then it's only a little bit. And then we use the amount to the point where, so this is without any, I'm sharpening until I start seeing halos appear. There they are. And now back away. So we keep the radius low, keeps it tight on the edge. We keep the threshold relatively low because I do want to sharpen most things in the image. Halo suppression if we need a little bit of it, but hopefully we don't. But more importantly, use the sharpening tool then to go up until you start seeing any artifacts you don't want, and then back away from there. Don't be tempted just to blindly put that to a number and then try and play with radius and threshold. Your variable is the amount. The radius and threshold, they'll actually determine whether it's a good sharpening or a bad sharpening based on those thresholds. The sharpening amount is the amount that you're controlling. And then, before and after, yeah, it's a sharper version of the image. We don't have any halos, don't have any issues with there. If I were to then pull into our natural clarity, And again, sharpening, structure, clarity, all part of the same group of tools. If you start doing all of them, they start compounding. They do slightly different things, but the effect starts to amplify. So if you were on the border of getting halos with just sharpening, start adding some structure, start adding some clarity, and you're going to find that you're getting more halos that are out of control. So a little bit of structure, a little bit of clarity. I'm going to come back a little bit and use my halo suppression to get it back. And that's enough. Now I can see on my screen that's had the right effect. Hopefully you can see it on the YouTube version, but I wouldn't sharpen out here and I wouldn't push it too far. The rest of it, let's just have a look at the crop. Regular crop tool, not the AI one. And I'm just going to set it to freeform. So unconstrained, because I want to get the most out of what we've got here. I think this is similar to what Roger probably cropped into as well. Yep. And then the rest of it, I would probably be in a place where we just do a little bit of contrast tweaking. You notice I'm not even adding any layers in this. A bit of highlight recovery, just to keep some of this detail in here. I know that Roger's already done that in here. But what he's also done is added in a little bit of saturation boost. We can do, but that's going to do everything. If I push this too far, everything becomes oversaturated. So instead, what I'd like to do is pick on our color balance and say let's say my midtones, I want to be a bit more golden. My highlights, we're going to turn into that blue. And my shadows, where am I going to take them? Not too green, maybe back towards that golden area as well. So what I'm doing is I'm splitting. Rather than just saying warmer, cooler, or more saturated, less saturated, I'm splitting the color balance of this image to say everything that's a midtone or a shadow becomes richer, greener, yellower, getting that sort of golden light. Everything that's a highlight, I'm actually happy being bluer, especially if it was a winter's, I think Roger said, yeah, winter sunrise. So we then go, oops, press the wrong key, from there to there. If we want the overall feel of the image, so everything to be more golden, well, we can use our white balance to do that. If we do that, it may knock the tint a little bit, so we might want to adjust that tint a tiny bit. That's kind of cool. We've got a bit of room in contrast if we want to, but I'm actually happy leaving it with that. If I want to build contrast on this, what I do is the opposite of what we try and do often, which is try and recover highlights and shadows and so on. And instead, we're going to actually darken down our shadows. So it's unusual that we'd use shadows to go darker, but because I want some more sort of beef down there in the darker lower midtones and the shadows, I'm actually going to drop the shadows more. Could do that in levels, could do it in curves. We could put in a luma curve and say, let's put in our familiar sort of S curve. But the shadows tool tends to do it in a lot more sympathetic way, I guess. So it ramps off the effect. Of course, we can do that in a curve, but it's already been done for you in a tool. The shadow tool does that. So let's use that. If we wanted to, we could try a bit of dehaze. Yeah, it does have an effect that's not too bad. Too much of it, just like sharpening, no, don't do that. But just a little touch. So if I go without and with, it's just getting rid of some of that haze that's out there. If I wanted to choose a different haze color, I can do manually, but that's pretty good. And then we come back to the sort of conundrum that we have, which is how much saturation to dial in. Maybe a bit there. And then going back to Roger's original one, well, let's look at this color up here and say, well, maybe specifically, in fact, let's find out what color it thinks it is. Yeah, it thinks it's in the oranges. The oranges, we can up their saturation. We can up their lightness. We could even make them slightly more reddy. The greens down here, or the yellows, let's make those a bit more green so we get a bit more definition. Saturation up, lightness down. So if I start looking at without that tool and with that tool, so we're starting to get bolder colors, specifically the greens and the yellows, not everything else. We could pick probably on here. Is that going to get to green? No, this might do though. So let's pick on our green specifically and drop them down. And to me, that sort of works. What we don't have here, which we do have out here, is this sort of crispy, crunchy, and to an extent over sharpened element out here. So if I look at these two side by side, this one at the top, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's fine. It will print okay. I'm not particularly fussed in that sense, Roger. So don't worry. But if you really wanted to clean those halos up, it's just a case of backing away with the sharpening and the clarity and the structure. Because you don't want that to be the bit that people see the most of. If you really want this foreground mountain to pop, let's just create a quick AI. See how quick that is now. Good point earlier. I can't remember who made it, but yeah, the 16.4 release has made the AI tool a lot quicker. So if we're going to do that with a mask, first thing, anytime you use the AI mask, please consider refining it. It doesn't have to be a lot, but you don't want that binary edge. So we refine it just to soften it. Second thing I would do, especially at a boundary, because we don't want this clarity to affect the boundary that we've just protected by using all those cool sharpening tools. Feather, and we're going to feather the edge of this mask to be really soft. Now what feathering's doing, just so we understand the difference. Feathering is not refining. Feathering takes the edge of that hard mask, whether it's refined or not, and then it says to the right and to the left of it, you're going to bleed. So the edge is now going to become 50% masked, not the 100 to 0 drop off, 50% of the edge, and to the outside now bleed slowly till you get to 0. On the inside, bleed so you slowly get to 100, which means that if I do a load of clarity, for example, at an edge, the most effect it's going to have at that edge is 50% and probably even less. So if I now use my clarity tool, I'm not affecting out here. I'm not building halos because my feathering is protecting the amount of clarity that's actually happening at those edges. So I can put a bit of clarity in there. I can put a bit of structure in there. I could even, if I wanted to, put some extra contrast in because I'm not going to blow that sky. And my AI mask, it's getting really, my AI mask doesn't make any sense. My AI mask is now adding that depth and the textures and the layers, but not affecting the sky. So we're not making the sky that sort of angry, crunchy sky. It's leaving that as it is and making all the anger, as it were, sit on the craggy rocks. And who has it said, Prasad? So a bit of vignette to finish. Maybe. Vignetting is personal preference. I actually really like it. It adds an element of sort of light control. The irony is we all spend a fortune on lenses that don't have vignetting and don't have softness at the edges. Then we go into software and we add in the vignetting separately. But it can add something. And in this case, on this one, yeah, actually, it probably does. And we end up with a very different edit to what Roger started with. So Roger's is very bright, very, very warm, very golden. The one that I've got at the bottom just, to me, feels a bit more, I guess, in keeping with the scraggediness or cragginess, I guess, of the rocks out there. It doesn't mean it's different. It doesn't mean it's better. It doesn't mean it's right and one's wrong or whatever. I wasn't there. If it felt more warm and golden like that, Roger, then stick with it and do the same color edits. What I have seen on here that you've got slightly differently on here is this rock out here in the front. There is a bit of a lift in the shadows. So I'm just going to do the same here. So I've now got my little mask there, having drawn a rectangle over it. We are going to refine it because I want it to really softly fall off. And then with that specific set of rocks, because it's an edge, remember we're using an edge, I'm going to feather that mask as well. And that specific set of rocks, increase a bit of clarity, but lift up those shadows. So we keep the detail in there. Because remember, I knocked down the shadows for the entire shot. And what that's done is it's possibly dropped some of the detail in here. So that just lifts it back up a tiny little bit. Okay, so that's Roger. The sun burst through after the dark clouds passed. Where's that shot? But yeah, I mean, it's a really nice scene. Love it. The DNG thing, hopefully it makes sense to people. So if you are going to send edits to people, just remember the second you create a DNG for a panorama or an HDR, it's going to be difficult. It's not impossible, but difficult for you to get an edited or an editable version of that to someone else in Capture One. For now, who knows where we're going with that. Okay, Brian. The question came up a little while ago in the Facebook group, so that one, about black and white conversions and color versus black and white, when to do the conversion. So in other words, do you get a color image looking perfect in color and then make it black and white, or do you go straight to black and white and then do the tweaks in color? Honest answer, it doesn't really matter to a certain extent. We did a masterclass a while ago with specifically around black and white. So if you go onto our website, you'll be able to access it. And what we go into detail in that is there are certain tools that affect the black and white conversion prior to conversion. There are certain tools that just behave like normal. So to give you an example, and this is Brian's edit, so I'm going to create a quick clone of it. Remember, if ever you're going to create a version of an edit, don't just go straight into the variant. Right click on it, go to clone variant. That gives you a baseline, so we protect this one with Brian's edits on, and I'll go into the new one that I've created just behind my head there. Okay, so this is with all the edits already in. Let's have a look at what before and after. So we've got quite a lot of recovery in here. I would, to my eye, there's a slightly too obvious recovery in the middle in here, but we'll come back to that in a second. In fact, what I'm going to do is create a brand new scratch variant. Okay, so this is out of camera. So let's do a black and white conversion, basic black and white conversion. The function that you've got in Capture One for black and white. So remember, you can use black and white styles. So they're in your styles tab here. There are some that are built in into here under black and white, and you've got some basic stuff. You can also buy black and white styles that you can apply to it, and it will emulate film and so on. But they're all using, to lesser or greater extent, the black and white tool. And this tool basically takes all of these different channels, so the 6 channels, RGB, and then what's it, cyan, magenta, yellow, and cyan, magenta, yellow. What am I talking about? Red, green, blue, cyan, magenta, yellow. Yeah, that's it. That's the 6. And it takes each of those channels, so effectively those wavelengths, and allows us to apply a brightening or darkening into the black and white conversion. So if I look at our before and after, we can see, for example, we've got a blue sky. Great, bright blue sky. And the default has taken, and just so you're all clear on exactly what's going on, if I move my mouse over here, you see the combined amount of the red, green, and blue channels is 137 here. So 134, 137, 125-ish. Basically middle grey. So it is taking this luminosity amount, because we haven't tweaked any color, and it's giving us middle grey. It's basically taking whatever that amount was and applying it to red, green, and blue. So there's no difference in any of the channels. We remove all color information. Great. But what happens if I wanted to, let's say, darken the sky? Well, because the sky and the water are dark, or are blue, well, I can say specifically that conversion, if you're blue, lighten up, please, or darken down. Now, this was no different to the used to be able to put filters in front of film cameras. We still can, and digital, but you can put a filter in front of the lens that blocks certain colors or adds certain colors into the mix. A lot of black and white digital sensors, you'll still use a filter in front to cut yellow, to cut blue, or to get UV, or to get infrared, and so on. So all we're doing here is doing it post-event. Now, it's not going to be quite as good as if you'd done it at the point of capture, but it does give me a lot more creative control because I can also pick on cyans because, of course, not all of the sky is blue. Some of it is light blue. And what you're seeing here, look, it's making no difference to my before, obviously. It's only affecting what the translation is inside the black and white tool when it says, right, as I'm taking this bit of the sky out here, where it was 128, if we remember, because I've told it to do minus 56, whatever they are, so a 56th of something, it's no longer 128. That blue is now being dropped to 33 up here. Leave the others alone. Leave them as they were because they're not blue. I could do the same with the green of the trees. So let's take the green and lighten them up. So I can get my trees, look, glowing. I can make them disappear, or I can make them glow. Same with yellow. That's going to be more on the rock face. Same with reds. Not a lot of red in this picture. Little bit of magenta play. Nothing in there. Cyan I'm going to drop down again. So I'm effectively tweaking what happens in the black and white conversion. Now here's the problem. Because I've got other tools that affect color, if you think about what's happening here, you'll understand now what's happening when I change my white balance, for example. So if I make the image more yellow, in other words, yes, blue or less blue. So hold on, the sky has now gone back to middle gray. Well, why is that? Well, because in the non-black, so again, I can't see anything because my before version is the raw. But in the non-black and white version, turn this off, my sky is now no longer really that blue. It's not really in that range. So because I've shifted the sky from being nice deep blue to being this sort of grey, yellowish blue, all of a sudden the black and white slider down here doesn't really pick it up. It's not darkening the blue anymore because it's not blue anymore as a base edit. If I look at our color editor, or sorry, color balance, well, what happens if I take our highlights and I make them more yellow and more blue? So what's happening here? I'm on a black and white image, but all of a sudden I'm shifting my colors. I'm actually introducing color into the mix. Why? Because the color balance tool effectively applies after the black and white conversion. So it's now changing the highlights to be from non-saturated to, let's say, more pink. And the midtones, we can make them more green. So this is why it's really important that you understand almost the layering of the tools to say, these are the tools that affect my black and white conversion before conversion. And these are the tools that affect the output after conversion, color balance being one. Let's take our color editor. So the blues in the color editor. Well, they're clearly before conversion because it's affecting what's happening to that conversion. If I turn off the black and white tool and see what's happened, so even though it's interesting, isn't it? My white balance is now souped up really, really warm, which told the black and white tool you're no longer blue. But because I then took what was vaguely blue and said you really are blue and you're going to be darker as well, now my black and white tool kicks in again on the sky. Badly, don't get me wrong, don't do this. This mottling up here is horrible. But you are starting to see the effect of changing with either the color editor or the white balance before you start to change the black and white tool and its sensitivity on each of the different channels. So it's almost a warning. Just be really careful. I'm going to reset the black and white tool. I'm going to reset my white balance. What I would do personally, because you also never know when you might want a color version, I would get the shot correct in color. So I think this is possibly a little bit too blue. I would argue we could go a little bit up to there, a little bit to there. I would do some serious sort of shadow recovery in there. This is a little bit too saturated almost as well. And I know it's out of camera, Brian, don't worry. It's not at you. It's just, it just feels very overpowering in there. That's why, because I didn't reset the color editor. I was right. It's very oversaturated. But we don't need to worry about this one now. So shadow recovery, great. Got a little bit of that. If anything, I might actually want to dial in a little bit of that blue stuff again. So let's just saturate it a little bit and darken it down. The greens could do with a little bit of attention. So let's just increase their saturation, maybe increase their lightness. That's pretty nice. Whether I'd want to put a gradient in, I don't know. But if I look at the before and after, I've now got a better, arguably, color image. From there, right click, clone the variant. I just did that behind my head so you didn't see it, but here, clone the variant. And with our clone, I would then create a separate one, black and white tool, enable black and white, and now play with my sliders. So I know that that sky is blue. I know that we've got some cyan in there as well. I know I want to lift the trees, the green, and maybe even the yellow. And then maybe, back to Powell's thing, maybe we put a bit of a vignette, not that much, don't be silly. But, you know, maybe into there. And then we can put touch of clarity, again, not too much. Maybe push those shadows a little bit more, probably recover a bit of highlights. We don't want to be too much yin and yanging these. Maybe punch a touch of contrast. And we end up in a pretty good place. You know, this is Brian's edit here. Don't have an issue with it. It's a nice edit. Brian spent a lot more time with masks. So, for example, this banding out here, I'd probably put in a little mask. Let's just do it very quickly. So here's my sky. Because it's an AI mask, I'm going to refine it. You're going to get bored of that phrase, but it is important. And I'm also going to feather it a little bit at the edge. And then what I'm going to do is go into my structure and pull it down, and clarity and pull it down. And that's just getting rid of that texture that was sat in the sky. Not completely, but it does help it. So if I get rid of that and that, we've just smoothed out the sky. Could use the skin tone tool to do the same. We get to a very similar place. But in answer to the question around what would be the order, if you want to go straight into black and white, by all means do it. And actually you'll end up with a recipe that works in your head. But I don't see the harm. If you're shooting in color anyway, get the color one right. It just makes sense that you'd start from a good base. Because if you start tweaking, as you've seen, if you start tweaking color editor, white balance and so on, after you've done your black and white conversion, you can end up down a horrible rabbit hole trying to chase the fact that, well, hold on a second, I darkened my blues, but now they've got lighter. Well, why is that? Is that because I've changed the white balance? Have I changed the color editor? It won't be the color balance, because that's going to be the output, and that throws your mind a little bit further as well. So just, I would start from a great color base, then move into black and white from there. Prasad, symmetrical crop 2:1 to finish. Maybe. I don't know whether that's just a bit too geometric. You don't want to lose the top of this cap, really. So, yeah, I'd be worried about going too heavy on that. I've just seen the thing that Brian, I think, mentioned in the top corner, which is the vignette. That may be a filter holder or something like that. In our lens corrections, light fall off is just about getting it there. But yeah, be careful with whether it's a lens hood or a filter holder with vignetting. It's a bit of a challenge there. But I don't know. I don't think it needs that complete geometric crop. I think actually I'm okay with it being wider, to be honest. I'm just going to undo back to there. Where are we? There. That feels okay. If anything, if we are going to really crop it, I'd almost be less literal with it and create maybe even a crop that doesn't include the completion of this reflection, and go into there. I kind of like that crop. It doesn't have to be the full butterfly effect of both sides, if you see what I mean. Miguel, so then it is not a good idea to boost the colors before black and white in order to gain a little bit of contrast. You can, just remember that you've done it. Because what you'll end up then doing is using those black and white sliders. And if you forget, just like I did actually, when you just saw happen in that demo, I forgot that I'd used the color editor to boost the blues. Well, the result then is you start chasing those black and white sliders not understanding why they're having a weird effect, different to what you'd expect. And the problem, as you've seen, when you're in black and white conversion, I can't see the intermediate stage in before and after. I can see the raw, and I can see the black and white conversion. The only way I can see the intermediate stage is to turn off the black and white tool. So this then shows me the edited version of the raw, but without the black and white. That would give me a clue. But yeah, I would just be careful more than anything. Right, let's just go on to, I'm going to pick up on, we've got lots to catch up on. I've got some news about how frequently we're going to be doing these for a little while. So we have got some stuff to catch up on. Now, I'm going to get the name wrong like I did the first time that you sent one in, but Venugopalan, I think that's right. Forgive me if it's not, but I remember we had to practice the first time. It's very difficult to say when you've got a cough as well. So this is a edit already, trying to show the sort of color. So when you get haze in the morning, one of the beautiful bits of haze is the particles that are in the air scatter the light. So you get this really soft, golden, you know, really, really nice, calm light that you can play with. And this is out of the camera, bit cooler, bit greener. This is the edit that's been done. So in here, the subject mask using AI and adjustment layer for everything that wasn't the subject mask. So I'm guessing, if I was going to put money on it, that this is probably a layer where you've right-clicked, gone to copy mask from the subject and inverted it. Either way, I don't actually think we need a mask on this image, believe it or not, because I think a lot of this can be done through levels and curves and actually the basic tools in Capture One. So for completeness and to make things neat, because we tell people off for not doing this, I'm going to make the changes on a filled adjustment layer. If you forgot to do that, you can always right click on your image layer and you can go to move image layer adjustments to a new layer. So that didn't used to exist, happened a few versions ago. It's a lifesaver. So sometimes I forget to do my adjustments on a layer. I then want to make some changes to them or copy them to another layer or so on. And I can't because they're on the background. Background got renamed to image layer. An image layer got a new function saying move all of those adjustments you've made in the image layer to a new layer. Wonderful. The neater way is to start with a filled layer, obviously. Oh, Brian, Canon's new 14 to 35 zoom vignettes at 14. If that's naturally in the lens, that's not good, mate. Didn't know that. The 15 to 35, if you're talking about the RF, the 15 to 35 doesn't. So, ooh, you would hope from a manufacturing point of view that at least out of the box, it wouldn't do that. But, oh well. Good luck, Brian. When we get to this sort of histogram, so this is telling us it's a very soft image. Don't have any massive highlights, don't have any massive shadows. There's two ways that I can enhance this. One, we can use our levels tool to effectively stretch that histogram out. So we've got from there to there. So more depth in here, a bit more brightness in here. The other way, which I prefer, get a luma mask and we're going to increase our brightness there. We're going to decrease our shadows there, and I'm actually going to drop. So this is doing the same as levels, but it's actually giving us an acceleration, a bit of a hump for the bright areas and the dark areas. So it's saying, right, I want to move the point of the brightest part of the image in. So it's now going to be 244 down here rather than 255. The darkest part is now going to be 12 rather than 0. So we're stretching the shadows, making them darker, stretching the highlights, making them lighter. The midpoint I want you to leave alone. But these highlights here and these shadows here, I want you to ramp up. So don't just do it linearly, which is what the levels tool will do. I want you to accelerate it. Now the problem with doing it with Luma, and everyone always gravitates to the Luma curve. Great stuff, wonderful. Luma curve is a really powerful tool. But we said, I want to get some of that color. So let's use the RGB curve, which everyone seems to have forgotten. It's sort of dead to everyone. Doesn't need to be. Same thing. Pull that in, pull that in. In fact, just as an experiment, let's do exactly this. Let's go on to a Luma curve. It's not going to be exactly right. Forgive me for that, but we'll get them as close as we can. So midpoint there, lift our highlights, drop our shadows. Great, that's the Luma version. Here's my RGB version. So drop that into there, drop that into there, lift my highlights a little bit, drop my shadows a little bit. Now let's look at the two side by side. The RGB curve also has the effect of increasing perceived saturation. So if I'm in a mindset where I'm trying to increase or enrich the colors that are in a shot by using the curve, the Luma curve is not going to help me. I can still do it through saturation or through a color editor or through color balance or any of the other tools. But you've got an all-in-one trick here, which is the RGB curve, because as it changes the values, it's also effectively increasing or decreasing saturation as well. So if I want to start from a base of having a more richness or more of a richness to those colors, use the RGB curve. It's almost become a, who uses the RGB curve because Luma doesn't affect saturation. What happens when I want to affect saturation? Use that curve. It's great. So on our RGB curve here, we can now actually warm up a little bit that light. This up here is almost a little bit green. It's actually possibly overexposed. Yeah, we're hitting pretty high up there, although why it's telling me 255, I don't believe that, to be honest. It's an interesting interpretation. No, it's not. So it's 233. Weird little glitch there with Capture One. It got frozen at 255. So what I would say is it's not quite, to me, yellow and red enough. So I'm going to actually shift our tint to be a little bit up. It's telling me that this bit here is now overexposed. I don't believe it is. I believe the red channel is getting close to clipping at 254. I'm okay with that. That's fine. So exposure warning is exactly that. It's a warning. Take it as a warning. Don't take it as an absolute rule. I'm going to go into our color balance tool now and say, right, let's think about this. What do I want to happen between the different interplays with shadows, highlights, and midtones? Well, certainly the highlights, I want to be nice and warm. So let's do that. Let's move our highlights into maybe a more reddy color there. What about my midtones? Well, I could make them cool if I wanted to, but actually I think they need to be almost sort of into this reddy pink color. That's kind of nice. Shadows, well, I can cool them down. That gives us a nice contrast. I wouldn't go opposite in the color wheel to the greeny stuff. That doesn't really make sense. That's more of a cross-processed look. It's a great style, but if we're trying to keep this natural, that doesn't really make sense. I wouldn't go more reddy pink, but what I would do is maybe cool it down a little bit into this sort of blue area. So I'd be in a place of, that's kind of works. I'm wondering maybe that's a bit too much. I'm just going to back this away a little bit. But if I look before and after, so Veni Gopalan, you were there, I wasn't. If that is what it felt like, that it was warm, it was reddy colored, it was that real sort of hazy, misty, almost ethereal sort of light, that to me would do it as an edit, rather than this, which still feels quite washed out. I'm just going to delete that Luma one there. If I look at the left and right, if we're going for saturation, and this is the point, it's only your call. I wasn't there, I don't know what this actually looked like. But if you remember it being saturated, then use a curve that's going to saturate, the RGB one. Use your color balance tool to shift highlights and shadows independently, so you can start to tweak them and have a bit more control over it, rather than just the blanketness of the white balance tool, which is almost our default go-to. I'd also be tempted to put in a gradient up here. And maybe, create a new layer first. Never forget that, boys and girls. So new gradient up here. And I'm going to pull down our exposure a little bit there. What a difference that makes. And also I'm going to back away just like I did before. I'm going to reduce some clarity, reduce some structure, and also I'm going to add in some haze. Not too much, just maybe there. I'm going to choose the color, which is this yellowy color. So we go from, we're actually adding in some lightening effect effectively into it. But what that means is that I can afford then to pull that exposure down again. Yeah. And that starts to look pretty neat. So crop wise, do we leave this bit on the bottom? I'm not sure. I don't think it adds much. So maybe you'd come up to there potentially. You've already done the correction in Keystone, the auto Keystone. That's done a good job. I would personally maybe be in there as a frame, but nothing wrong with this edit. The edit works. But if you are going for color, use the tools that are designed for color. So the RGB curve, the color balance tool, the color editor tool, even the white balance tool, and really start to flex what you can play with those tools. Don't just do it as a global thing. You know, the image just needs to be warmer. What part of the image needs to be warmer? Because the shadows in this don't. If you made the shadows warmer, it doesn't really feel like a shadow then. It feels just like you put a yellow filter over everything. So use a mix. Play with those tools, split them out, split tone if necessary. But that RGB curve, we often overlook it. I wouldn't. If you're looking for saturation, the Luma curve doesn't give you that. It gives you increases in contrast or decreases. It does not change the saturation. The RGB's got it all built in one go. Okay, so I think for today, that's where we're at. So, bit of news. Because I am due to be around, here's a fun fact, due to be around for a little while, we are going to increase the frequency of these. So we had to decrease it back to every month. We're going to try and hit this every 2 weeks now, which will help me get through a backlog of images that we're trying to get through at the moment. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time back on here. In the meantime, you've got access to all of those masterclasses, including a black and white one. If you go to the website or the link that's in this video, you'll see it. If you want to upload files, please do. They are there. Hopefully by next time my voice is a little less strained. But in the meantime, you've also got access into that pro tips thing, which is all of those sections, one of which being clarity, structure, and sharpening. And that there is us done for the day. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. In the meantime, those are the ways to get hold of us. Look after yourselves, and we'll see you then. Cheers. Bye-bye.